Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Caponomics 101. We'll call this one Salary Cap Basics. In general, I get a lot of questions on the salary cap, as you can imagine. A lot of them are the same questions. A lot of people very interested in learning more about the salary cap. Obviously, there's a lot of people just very interested in getting numbers. How much does a player cost in a given year? But there are other people who are really into, understanding the way the salary cap works, how it's calculated, what counts on it, what doesn't count on it. So what I wanted to do was set up a little presentation, go over it in a slideshow format, and, just have this up there as a reference tool, to maybe answer a lot of these questions rather than me just sending emails back and forth with someone or, trying to post an article where someone has to read it, gets buried somewhere on the site. So I think I'll do a couple of these if feedback is even remotely decent. I'll set up things on just some more topics, whether it's the real meat and guts of a contract, how the tender process works for franchise players, restricted free agents, a number of different topics that we can talk about more in length. This will just be a very high-level overview of the salary cap itself. And I'll put the contact information on the end of this. I'll put the slide deck up on the website. It'll probably be up whenever I upload this presentation itself. But it might take me an extra day. Yeah, I guess that's possible. So anyway, feel free. You can break this up, listen to it as, in as many parts as you want, and hopefully you'll get something out of it that answers some of the questions that you might have. We'll start out with what is the salary cap? Just the very basic fundamentals of the NFL business side here. And the salary cap, what I have written down here, it's an amount of counting dollars each team is allocated to spend in a season on their roster. What that means is that it's not a cash cap. Many of the components of the salary cap are cash value on a contract. But as you'll see in a little bit later in this slide deck and, further on when we get a little bit more in depth on some of the contracts, that there is a lot of accounting in it. It's very similar to depreciating an asset if you've ever taken just a basic accounting course in college or maybe in high school, where you've just learned about, just basic depreciation, through running a business or, just doing taxes. Maybe you rent, you rent a property to someone and you learned about depreciation that way. So that's part of it as well. So that's the basics of just, what the salary cap is. Just think of it as a limit for teams to spend in a season. Okay, how do we determine the amount? Now, for the most part, determining the amount of the salary cap is really above anything that we can do. People do ask me all the time about, well, can you estimate a salary cap? And the real answer to that is no, you can't. You can forecast the salary cap just like you would forecast sales, where, you're basically going to look at old trends. You'll create a little regression analysis and, project where it's going to go. The difficulty with that is, the league is always changing. Their revenue streams are always changing. The way the salary cap grew through 2006 was significantly different than the way it grew through 2009. And that was because of the different CBAs, different agreements on how to split up the money. Really, we're in uncharted territory right now. We're only 2 years into the CBA. In 2011, the salary cap was a fixed amount. In 2012, they used a formula, and apparently there were some kickbacks given to inflate the salary cap. And in 2013, I think kind of the same thing happened. There were concessions made on the union side to, increase the level of the salary cap. But just to answer the basic questions of how they do this, The league divides revenues up into three, what they call revenue buckets. The main bucket is what's league media, and you can guess exactly what that is. That is basically the cash cow of the NFL right now. And that is your television contracts. Those are your TV contracts with CBS, NBC, Fox, ESPN. It includes the Sunday ticket package on DirecTV. It includes radio broadcasts, the Westwood One network that carries the games, and I believe the Sirius satellite radio that carries the games on there as well. The way that that's divided up, 55% of that revenue goes towards player costs. 45% of the revenue goes to owners. Anything that goes to owners, that is going to cover expenses and profits. For the players, it's going to cover a number of things, which we'll talk about a little later. It's not just salary to play football. The second category is NFL Ventures. NFL Ventures is split 45% to the players, 55% to the owners. I actually consider that kind of an interesting split. The NFL Ventures is a lot of your really rapidly growing revenue streams right now. Included in that are the NFL Network, NFL.com, NFL Mobile, Game Pass, the NFL Network football package. That's the one set of football games that is separate from the league media. So that is different. Online game viewing. A lot of these different little revenue streams that are really growing. You're talking about social media. It's a very viable stream of advertising revenue, and I have a feeling that when this CBA is done, if things continue on the same path that they're continuing, and who knows, you're talking 8 years from now when a new CBA is going to come up, you have a feeling that will be a sticking point, because right now the players are kind of going to get a short end of that, and that might end up growing faster than some of these other forms, of revenues. The third revenue stream is local revenue. 40% of that goes to the players, 60% to the owners. That's basically your local team money, your operation of concessions, your parking money, your money that you get on game day. That also includes money for preseason games. Typically your preseason games are shown on local networks. They're not packaged nationally. They're sold individually. It's the only set of football games sold individually. So, for the teams in my area, which are the Giants and the Jets, their games are broadcast on CBS 2 New York or NBC 4 New York, WPIX 11, UPN 9, or whatever those little stations are called nowadays. That money all goes in a higher proportion to the owners, which I think makes a little bit of sense, since it's not collectively, bargained, and that's really day-to-day operations. If you're talking about running the stadiums themselves, and having to use your own sales guys to get networks to broadcast your games. Now, the NFL does receive credits to take off of the revenue. One is a joint contribution fund. This is basically payments that I believe mainly go to veteran affair kind of things for older players. I believe that's the way that it works. I probably should have looked that up and taken some notes on it. 47.5% is credited off of the player costs. The rest of it will basically be paid by the league and no credits received. And the final credit is private stadium funding. That's essentially the stadium projects that come up and are financed by the league. The league will give a portion of money to the teams to construct the stadium, or stadiums that are privately financed by the owners. You don't see that often. You saw the situation recently in Miami. They were looking to get a tremendous amount of public funding. I don't believe you would receive a credit for that. It has to be with private funds. Now, here's the one thing that most people don't realize, and I know it comes up a lot when we talk about the increases in salary cap that are expected because of the increases in television contracts. While the TV contracts have a split of 55% to the players, the league and the union agreed on capped levels for the player costs. Basically they set an upper band and a lower band, where they said that they're going to add up the projected revenues. Player costs cannot be greater than 58.5% of projected revenues. Now, they also say they can't be lower than 47%. But what that means is if there's a point in time where league media is pulling in a disproportionate amount, the league will get to actually pull down on the amount of money that goes to the players based on these percentages. Now, if for some reason league media goes down a lot, you might see the bump up because of it. But most likely, it's probably another mechanism where the union probably lost a little bit in the negotiation. After the stadium credits applied, player costs can decrease all the way down to 46%. So that actually caps the stadium credit. So that's protection for the players in the event that, in the rare event that the league decides to fund 7 stadiums at once or 8 stadiums at once, that there's just such a gross amount of money that goes into the stadium credit, the league can only take a certain portion of that a year. After those are determined, your player costs are reduced by a projected player benefit to actually get to the salary cap. Now, the player benefits, and I think I have a slide on this a little bit later on, but your player benefits are essentially money that's paid to the players that is not considered salary cap money. Those player costs can be, severance pay, it could be moving expenses, performance-based pay, rookie redistribution fund, I think, is included in that. So that it's a different side of the equation. So really what the revenues do and the credits is they determine player costs, and then the player costs are split up into player benefits and salary cap. So, let's just do a quick example here. These are all made-up numbers. There's no reality to any of this. I just kind of guesstimated some numbers here based on things listed in the CBA. The only one that might be close is the NFL Ventures. And the only reason that might be a little bit close is because I think it was Deadspin somehow got their hands on audited financial statements for NFL Ventures, and their revenues, I think it was in 2011, were basically about $2 billion. So that is probably the only one of these that's close to the right amount. Okay, so what we have here is we'll take the input of $6 billion in league media, $2 billion in NFL Ventures, $1.4 billion in local revenues. So we add those together to come up with total revenues for the year of $9.4 billion. We're going to call a joint contribution of $58 million. Just to make this easier, we're going to go with a zero stadium credit and player benefits of about $740 million. So our total revenues of $9.4 billion. And from that, we calculate our bands. If we go, back a slide and where we have our maximums and minimums, we'll call our upper band at $4.559 billion. That's the most that can go to the players under this input scenario. And our lower band will be 4.418. That is the least amount of money that will go towards the player costs in this fictitious league year. So we calculate it, just in the same proportion. $6 billion times 55%, $2 billion, 45%, 1.4 0.4%. So this is our player cost revenue generators. Joint contribution fund, that's our credit. So we come up with these, we add them together, we get total player costs of $4,732,450,000. That is how much money the league should spend based on the example inputs. However, the cost is... Oh, that's actually wrong. That's actually wrong what's there. The cost is actually higher than the upper band. $4.559 billion. I'll try and get that fixed up in the slide deck. But what that means is that we're going to have to bring our total down to $4.559 billion. So to come up with the amount of money per club, we just simply take that figure and we divide it by 32. So each club in this league year will have $142,468,750 to spend on players. To actually calculate the salary cap, we take the player benefits, which we guesstimated at $740 million. That works out to $23.125 million per team. We subtract that from the number, and you come up with a salary cap of $119,343,750. That is each team's amount that they can spend in accounting dollars for football in this league year. So that's how you calculate the salary cap. That is how they come up with the number. It's a much longer process than a couple slides, but that is how they do it. And unless the NFL ever became a public entity where you can actually look at these revenues before they set a salary cap, there's really no way to have an accurate guess on it at all. And when most people get the information, they're really just really guessing on it unless they have just a tremendous source that really is working with the numbers all the time. Minimum spending. There is no salary cap spending floor. In the old CBA, there was a spending floor in cap dollars. That was eliminated in this CBA. In this CBA, teams can be as far below the cap as they feel like being. The Philadelphia Eagles last year had $23 million in unused cap space. $23 million. That's unheard of in the old CBA, whereas most teams had to be within a couple million by the end of the year. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars were about $20 million in unused cap space. So there are large amounts of unused cap space that have gone on in this new CBA. There are, however, cash spending floors in the NFL. There are two cash spending floors that have to be the concern of everyone. The first cash spending floor is on a team-wide basis. Each team must spend 89% of the salary cap, as we calculated on the previous slide, over a 4-year period, or, they'll face, it's not really a penalty, but they'll have to pay back the shortfall. The league breaks these up into two buckets, 2013 through 2016 and 2017 through 2020. Why are they not year by year? That's because of items such as dead money. And we'll talk a little bit about dead money later on, but essentially if you have a team that has excessive amounts of dead money in a season, which means at some point in time they did pay a lot of cash to players, such as the Oakland Raiders this year, where they're carrying close to $50 million in dead money. A team like that, because of the salary cap, physically cannot spend 89% of the cap this year in cash. It is almost impossible with that amount of dead money. So basically what this does is this allows you, to reap the benefits of paying large signing bonuses, which don't count against the cap, but they will count for cash totals and cash values in a given year. The second one to concern yourself with is league spending. League-wide basis has to spend 95% of the salary cap. Why the difference? Why is that one so much higher? And, I think that's a pretty easy one to figure out. There are a number of teams in the NFL that are essentially considered to be non-spenders. Now, it's not always true, but, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs, for years have been considered teams that just try and do things to meet cap minimums but not necessarily spend cash. That's not always the case. The Bills spent a lot of money last year and the Chiefs spent it this year. So it's not like that's always the case, but there's a perception that there are teams that do that. So what the union does not want to see happen is every team in the league just spend 89%, and that's that. So on a league-wide basis, it has to be 95%. So what that means is if a team is going to spend 90%, another team actually has to spend 100% to balance that figure out. That shouldn't be an issue. There have historically been high spenders, the Dallas Cowboys, and then there's been the low spenders, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So, they should balance out, but this at least makes it to where financially the league has to balance out. If they don't, they have to make the players whole at the end of the 4-year period. So here's a quick example. I think this is actually one that is in the CBA itself, but let's say the salary caps from 2013 through 2016 are 120, 130, 140, and 150 million dollars. We can calculate the two totals on a league-wide basis. That's 540 million times 32 teams times 95%. Over the 4-year period, the league must spend in cash $164.416 billion on their players. On a team-wide basis, each team must spend at least $480.6 million on their rosters. What happens if they don't? You pay back the players the money owed. What they'll do is they will determine a proportion that it should be paid to the players in question. I assume if it's on a team-wide basis, they will account it, possibly to the years themselves that we're under. I'm not exactly sure how that mechanism works, but I would imagine that they will determine, the amount of money that you made with the team, what was your proportion of the salary pie in a given year, and you'll be paid back a proportion of this shortage in dollars in the 2017 calendar year or in the 2021 calendar year. There's no cap penalties, no league fines. So the cash minimums don't really have a lot of bite to them, because the worst thing that happens is you're simply paying things back. So imagine it as if somebody said, well, here's the deal. We're going to give you $10,000 today, and we would like you to spend $10,000 over the next 4 years on yourself. And you might say, oh, that's great. I shouldn't say spend on yourself, just to spend. Spend on something. Or your other option is you can take that $10,000 and you can invest it for however many years, the 4 years or whatever. Maybe you get $2,000 out of it in interest, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And the bottom line is you now have $2,000 in your pocket, and all you had to do was take that $10,000 and give it back. You were going to have to give it back anyway, because you were going to give it out to somebody to do a job. And you decided that, maybe it wasn't worth paying them now. I can take that money and I can make more money with it. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think that the cash minimums have a lot of teeth. But, for some teams, they might look at it that, spending the cash gives them the best opportunity to win. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. In general, the older players get, the more money they get. The more they age, though, usually their performance starts to decline. So that you have to be sometimes very careful with spending a lot of money in the league, because it doesn't pay off. Cap adjustments. Each team is going to have their salary cap adjusted upwards or downwards. What this means is that while they calculate a salary cap number, and that salary cap number that's calculated is used to determine, whether what the 89% floor is and the 95% floor is, all it is a baseline number. Really, no team is going to have that figure as their salary cap. No team will have the same salary cap, most likely. There might be a couple teams that end up carrying the same number, but the cap is going to be adjusted. The first thing it's adjusted for is the prior year carryover. Those are the cap dollars not spent in the prior season. So where we talked about the Philadelphia Eagles before, having over $20 million, that means that the following year they will take that $20 million of unused cap space and add it, to their total. So that gives them $23 million more than any other team just right off the bat from carryover. Now, they do actually make you, in the CBA, you're supposed to write a letter to the NFL saying how much money you want to carry over. There were a couple of teams who did not carry over in the 2012 season, supposedly. Every team carried over in 2013, and I have a feeling that they might have gotten rid of that process of writing a letter, and it's just become automatic. Since it's not used in the calculations for the 89% or 95%, it really doesn't make a difference. The only difference it probably makes is from a public perception standpoint. If a team happens to have an incredibly high adjusted cap and they're sitting $30 million under the salary cap, fans might get upset saying the team's not spending money. That's really the only purpose, I would think, to not carry money over. Second category is what's called adjustments. These are adjustments that are based on the prior year. Basically, and we'll talk a little bit about these categories later on in this presentation here. Salary unpaid but counted on the prior year's salary cap. That's a likely to be earned incentive. What that means is for salary cap purposes, there was money counted on a player's cap charge that at the end of the year he actually didn't earn. So in theory he was supposed to earn it. He didn't. So a team will get an adjustment upwards in the next season, to make up for that cap charge. If it's not likely to be earned, that means in theory the player probably shouldn't have earned this bonus. It was a more difficult bonus to achieve, but he did something special. He earned the bonus. Well, you didn't get charged for it, so because you didn't get charged for it, they will adjust your cap downward in the following season. Last, and there's other adjustments too, but finalized grievances. In a grievance, a certain percentage will be charged on the salary cap, and then the next year that number will be adjusted upwards or downwards depending on what the arbitrator decides is the amount of money the team owes the player in the grievance. Finally, league penalties. These are fines imposed by the NFL. They're most likely for trying to circumvent the salary cap. The most famous of all of them, obviously, is the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Redskins in the 2010 uncapped season. They made a handful of maneuvers that the league decided was an attempt to circumvent the salary cap, to get around it. It was not in the spirit of the rules, not in the spirit of the CBA. They took harsh penalties for that adjusted their cap downward. That money was recirculated to the other teams in the NFL, but it really doesn't have to be. That was how it was decided. All the teams were able to get a portion of that money added on to their salary cap, except for, I believe, the Saints and the Raiders. And the reason those two didn't get it is, I think it was determined that they also tried to circumvent the salary cap, but it was not as serious or as obvious as the Cowboys and the Redskins. So the deal there was they didn't get any benefit, but they also didn't get a penalty. Here you'll see a graph, that shows you the 2013 adjusted team salary caps. And as you can see, nobody is really on the number exactly. Very few teams are equal. In fact, there's maybe only 2 or 3 teams that look like they're equal. The 2 high points there, that is the Philadelphia Eagles and I believe the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that low point that you see in the right-hand corner there, bottom right, is the Washington Redskins. And, there is a major difference in the amount of money that can be spent because of adjustments between the Washington Redskins and the Philadelphia Eagles. So, if you are a well-managed cap team that has lots of carryover and good adjustments, you can create a competitive edge, a competitive advantage through your salary cap management. You can get yourself to where you can spend a lot more money than another team, and if it happens to be a really good free agent year, you can bring some guys in. They might have a short window. Like I said, as players get older, they get a lot worse. But you might have that short window to where it works for 2 years, and you can bring the guys in and you can flex financial muscle to basically steal players from other teams because they don't have the cap flexibility to meet the type of contract that you're going to give the player. The timelines themselves, the salary cap's in effect 365 days a year. I don't think people really realize this. It runs from the start of a league year to the finish of the league year. The reason most people don't realize this, I think most people think the salary cap ends in January, and that from January through March, everyone's allowed to be over the cap. That's true for the future league year. In other words, in January of 2012, you could be over the 2013 salary cap. However, you still couldn't make moves that would, increase your 2012 number to go over the salary cap. It wouldn't be allowed by the NFL. Now, typically, there's very few moves that you could do that would change the salary cap number for a prior year. Typically, it would involve cutting a player who has guaranteed salary in his contract. But this was a problem in 2009 or the 2010 calendar year, where the rules were different because of the uncapped season. In that acceleration, which typically after June 1st all goes to the next league year, actually accelerated into the current league year, into 2009. So you had a team like the Miami Dolphins cutting, I believe it was Joey Porter, and ending up with egg on their faces because the amount of acceleration actually put them over the salary cap and they were forced to take him back. Now, nothing goes on in that 2-month time, but that's got to be pretty embarrassing for a general manager to, kind of get, caught not understanding or not knowing the rules in place. And, so that's just something to keep in mind. It's in effect 365 days a year, but it is for the league year, at the time. Top 51 rule limits the amount of contracts that count from the start of the league year to the final cut date or thereabouts, before the regular season. This only refers to paragraph 5 salary. It's the base salary of the players. All bonuses will count on the salary cap. But the top 51 contracts plus dead money are all that count in the offseason. And the reason for that is the NFL has expanded rosters to 90. Before that, it was 80. You wouldn't be able to carry that amount of players, training camp bodies, tryout players, whatever you want to call them. You wouldn't be able to carry that amount of players in the offseason unless the salary cap increased greatly. So to do that, they just count the top 51 on the roster for that period of time. And then once September rolls around, then it goes to your full roster. Now, who counts towards the cap? All your contract players basically count towards the cap. Your active roster, your injured reserve, physically unable to perform, your practice squad. That's a question I get all the time. Practice squad does count towards the salary cap. The only players who really don't are, players who are on your reserve retired list, players that did not report. You have some type of exemption to where you're basically holding their rights, but they're not playing. So the only thing you're going to be charged for is just the signing bonus money you had paid them in the past. Former players count towards the cap. That's your acceleration from bonuses and dead money. Salary that was paid prior to a player's release. In other words, if a guy was on the team for 3 weeks, you paid him salary for those 3 weeks. Just because you cut him doesn't mean those 3 weeks vanish now. They go on the salary cap. Guaranteed salary. Money that you promise to pay a player even if he's not on the team. Once you cut him, that accelerates onto the cap. That becomes a charge that you have to account for. Grievances. Just if you cut a player and basically he says, I'm injured, I shouldn't have been cut. Injury settlement. That's how you settle some of these grievances before they get to arbitration. Termination pay. That's basically money that you owe a player that you cut, on a contract that was not guaranteed but became guaranteed because of rules in the CBA. What counts on the cap? A little bit different than who. What totals? Contracted salary. That's basically all the money in your contract that's considered likely to be earned. All prorated money, likely to be earned incentives, all off-season bonuses, all tenders that you give to a player, dead money, termination pay, injury grievances and settlements, injury protection. That's something that begins in 2016, and I'll give you my overview of that a little bit later on. I'm not 100% certain how that works, but I think I pretty much have a handle on it. So let's look over the components of a contract. Paragraph 5, salary. This is paid for weekly in-season participation. This is your salary. It's split over 17 weeks. The bye week counts as a week. You are paid that money in season, to be on the team. But the whole salary will count from day one. So if you say I'm going to pay a player $1.7 million for the season, you will be charged $1.7 million in March. There's no way around that. Now, if you cut the player after 3 weeks, then you will only count $300,000. That's where we talked about the former players, for salary already paid. Roster bonuses. Roster bonuses are paid for being a member of a team on a certain date. Typically, they're in the off season. Sometimes they're in season. Sometimes they're actually after the season. But, again, full amount is charged at the beginning of the league year. Reporting bonus. That's a bonus that's paid for reporting the training camp. Workout bonus, paid for completing voluntary off-season workouts. There's two types of workout bonuses. There's contracted workout bonuses, which are certain amounts for going to a percentage of practices. It might be $50,000, $20,000, $100,000. The highest in the league this past year was DeBrickashaw Ferguson at the Jets for $750,000. The other ones are really not contracted. They're just part of the CBA. I should have put the totals down. I can't remember. Maybe it's $180 a day. I can't remember what it is. Every day that you show up, you get paid, a little bit of money for attending workouts. And the workouts go for 9 weeks, 4 days a week maximum. So you can have a maximum of 36 sessions. Amounts treated as signing bonus. This is amount of money that is promised to a player right at the beginning of a contract. Typically, they're paid out within 2 years. They are prorated over the lesser of the life of the contract or a 5-year period. So if a player has a $10 million signing bonus, these are the ones that are not cash value in terms of accounting, where I talk about that depreciation. If the player has, say, a $10 million bonus and their contract is 5 years long, each year will have $2 million allocated to it from that signing bonus. However, if the contract is only 4 years, it'll be $2.5 million. It's, whichever is smaller. This includes option bonuses, salary advances, guaranteed off-season bonuses. Signing bonuses can be a lot of things. So basically just know that there are many mechanisms that can be a signing bonus. When we get more in depth on contract talk later on, we'll go a little bit more in depth as to what is a signing bonus, or what is treated as a signing bonus for salary cap purposes. Incentives, that's another component of a contract. These are the ones where some does count, some doesn't. They are valued based on how you perform the prior year. So we'll use a wide receiver as an example. Let's say he has a bonus for making 100 catches in a season. Let's say it's for the 2013 league year. In 2012, he had 101 receptions. That means the bonus is considered likely to be earned, LTBE. If it is likely to be earned, it will count towards the salary cap. The assumption is he did over 100 receptions the year before, he'll do it again. So if he has a bonus for $1 million, it will count on the salary cap. Not likely to be earned means he didn't do it the year before. So he might have had 99 receptions the year before. For salary cap purposes, it's assumed he will not earn that bonus. So it will not count towards the salary cap, and that's where the adjustments come in. At the end of the year, then they actually determine, did he earn what we thought he was going to earn, or did he not earn it? and they will make adjustments to the following year that make the team whole from a salary cap standpoint. Dead money. This is the salary paid to a player whose contract is no longer active with the team. This is primarily the acceleration of prorated money. So in those examples before, let's say the player had a 5-year contract. He had $2 million allocated over every league year. He only plays 2 years with the team. You've only accounted for $4 million. What happens to that other $6 million when you cut him? It all jumps onto your salary cap. It all accelerates to the cap. You account for it. This is the reason why when people say the NFL is a soft cap, they are completely and utterly wrong. Yes, in a given year, you can go over the cap and you can call it a soft cap. Over the long term, it is a hard cap. Look at the Oakland Raiders, $50 million in dead money. That is an absolute killer for them. So it's a hard cap because of this acceleration. Other forms of what I would consider dead money, salary paid to a player prior to release or trade. You maybe won't consider that totally dead since, he was on the team at that point in time, but, essentially it's money you paid to a player and he's no longer there. So, it's in that respect, you didn't think he was worth that money. So it's kind of dead money. Guaranteed salary owed to a player after he's released. This is something that has been widespread in the news because of the Jets, and Mark Sanchez. It was a factor with the Eagles, even though they decided to release Nnamdi Asomugha this past season. Using the Eagles example, they had a contract with Asomugha that stated, we will pay you $4 million regardless of whether you are or are not on the team. And he was so bad that they needed to release him. He couldn't play at the actual salary he was owed. He didn't want to take a pay cut to remain in Philadelphia. So they released him, and his $4 million becomes dead money because they owe him that money. It's just as if they had paid him that in a signing bonus and it wasn't, accounted for yet. So that's the concept of dead money. That all counts on the salary cap. Termination pay. This is salary that's paid, to released veterans. It's only available once in your career. And there's 2 categories of termination pay. And I think sometimes people forget the second one. The main one, and you'll hear about this a lot in September, it's the balance of a player's paragraph 5 if he's on the roster in week 1. Essentially what termination pay does is it acts as a guarantee on a player's salary. Not all players have a guarantee in their salary. Most players don't. If you are a veteran player, which means you've got at least 4 years in the NFL and played at least 6 games in each season. I shouldn't say played, been on an active roster for 6 games, and that includes injured reserve. You qualify for termination pay. So, this sometimes becomes a very difficult decision for a team. Let's say you're a player who is going to make $1 million because of your veteran status, or the minimum, the $940,000 for a 10-year veteran. And you're battling for a roster spot with a kid who makes, $480,000. The difference here is that if the $480,000 player is ineffective and you cut him, the only thing you owed him were the couple of games he played on the team. If you cut the veteran player, you owe him that entire $1 million. So it's an important point that teams consider, and sometimes they're willing to not keep the veteran player for the first week and add him to the roster at a later date just to avoid that guarantee. Now, if the veteran is added later in the season, he is still entitled to at least 25% of the unpaid paragraph 5. But at that point, the number is so much lower, teams aren't worried about it, and most likely, a player will not collect on it. That they might want to keep their hopes up to get a larger termination pay package in the future from another team. And because it's only available once, you might want to think twice about when you take that. Injury grievances. These are claims filed against the team for an improper release. Essentially, once the league year begins, you pass your physicals, you're under contract to the team. If you suffer a football-related injury, the team has to keep you and pay you. They can't release you for reasons dealing with your injury. And you'll hear a lot about players in the preseason. You'll hear it on the radio a lot of times with former players where they will say that they made up injuries to keep from getting released because they knew, since they said they were hurt, that the team could not release them, and they were hoping to keep a roster spot. I think Jerome Bettis actually said in the year they won the Super Bowl that the Steelers were going to release him, and he just kept basically saying he was hurt until it was the point in time where they were going to keep him, because they needed to leave him on the roster. They needed the roster spot. That's a challenge that comes up for teams. 40% of the grievance, whatever that amount is, whatever the amount that the player is suing the team for, will count on the salary cap. That number then, the full amount, is going to be settled through either arbitration or a settlement negotiation. The adjustments will be made the following year based on the actual award. Let's say, again, that it's a $1 million grievance. $400,000 will count on this year's salary cap. Let's say that the arbitration panel awards the player the full $1 million. The following year, the team's cap will be adjusted down by $600,000. They'll take a charge for that grievance. Now, let's say that his claim is thrown out, that they say there is no merit. The team did have the right to release him. The injury was not a football-related injury. In that case, they'll get a credit of $400,000 because it counted on last year's cap, but it shouldn't have. Injury settlements. This is the compensation for an injury suffered while under contract. These are negotiated. Typically, what you will hear about is a player is waived injured. From there, they have a period of time to negotiate a injury settlement with the player. What that does is that relieves the team of the injury grievance possibilities. They don't have a responsibility anymore. The player is waiving his claim to file an injury grievance. Why would a player do that? Well, maybe the player thinks he can play. Maybe he thinks he can pick up with another team. Maybe it's not that serious of an injury. The amount of money that it is equal to the pay for the amount of weeks the injury will keep a player on the sideline. So, again, let's say he has $1.7 million salary, just to make the numbers work out very easy. And let's say that, he gets hurt, and they just want to release him. And, the team says, well, you're probably going to have to go on injured reserve for the whole year. And, we're not really sure what the deal is with this injury. And, he might feel that he can pick up with another team and he's going to miss 3 weeks. They'll pay him $300,000 for 3 weeks of service. And basically he'll be on his way to sign with another team. If he signs before the 3 weeks is up, the team will get a credit for that. They won't owe it for him. I'd have to recheck into that off the top of my head. I can't really remember. The one thing to consider, and this is something that agents should consider for the younger players, it limits the ability for the player to re-sign with the team. So if a player has made it all the way through training camp and maybe he was going to get cut, but, the door was going to be open for practice squad return. Door was going to be open for a return if somebody got injured or was ineffective, or they decide, another rookie that they decided to keep in his place doesn't work out. They might look to re-sign that player. He has a relationship now with the team. If you accept an injury settlement, it will limit the ability to re-sign with the team. In order to re-sign with the team now, you have to wait the length of the settlement plus another 6 weeks. So if you take a 3-week settlement, you cannot re-sign with the team until week 10. So if you're going to take a short-term settlement, just for the sake of a couple dollars, it might not be worth it, because you might affect your opportunity to get back with that ball club. And again, it depends on what relationship that you have with the team and what you really figure. And, I don't know how open teams are, discussing with the players where they really stand and what they need to do to improve. But, it's just a small thing that, really should be considered, I think. Injury protection. This begins in 2016. What this is essentially a CBA version of a injury guarantee. It's not a full guarantee. It's a limited amount of dollars. Basically what this is salary paid for injury that prevents play in the years following the injury. What that means is if you got hurt and the reason you could not play in the final game of the season was because of this injury. So let's say you get hurt in week 15 or game 15, you can't play in week 16. You can qualify for this injury protection if you can't play the following year, because of the same injury. At that point, you will get the equal of the lesser of 50% of your paragraph 5 for that year, or $1.05 million. The limit on that 1.05 grows by $50,000 every 2 years. So it'll be 1.1 million in, I believe, 2015. The extra injury protection, or I think it's extended injury protection maybe, equals the lesser of 30% of the paragraph 5 salary, or $500,000, and that's in the second year. So that's if a player has at least 2 years remaining on his contract past the point of that injury. And, the injury he suffered kept him out. Let's say he suffers an injury in 2013. It kept him out 2014 and 2015. He can collect up to $500,000 or 30% of his stated P5 in that second year, in the 2015 league year. That limit grows by $25,000 every 3 years. And much like termination pay, injury protection is only available once in your career. Okay, what doesn't count on the cap? This really goes back to the benefit side of the equation. Postseason pay, that's paid by the league, not per team. Preseason pay, that's considered different than your regular season salary. The minimum salary benefit, this is money that is paid to veteran players where they don't take a full cap charge. The difference between the cap charge, which is that of a second-year player, and the player's actual salary, which can be as high as $940,000, will go as a benefit called the minimum salary benefit. Severance pay. If a player retires voluntarily or involuntarily, it just so happens this is the last team he ever plays with, you will owe him a certain amount of money for all his years in the NFL, for a veteran player. So that's severance pay. That's a benefit. Performance-based pay. That's a system that is developed to basically, compensate for pay inequality. You have rookies that make very little money, but maybe they play almost every single snap of a game. They deserve a little bit more money. So, they will get it. Every player on a team will get some portion of performance-based pay. Might be $1. It could be as high as $250,000, maybe even more. I believe on a team-wide basis, it's about $3.6 million. Now, the union, in some of those concessions that I talked about earlier in the presentation, they have changed the timing of the payment. While it will be earned in 2013, they will not receive the cash until, I believe, 2016. I believe there's a 2-year waiting period now. Exempt players, those are the players who didn't report. Pension funding, moving expenses. These are all the items. There's a meal allowance. That's what does not count on salary cap. So anyway, that finishes this out. Went about an hour. I thought it would be a little quicker than that. Hopefully this came out okay. Here's all my contact information. So if you have any other questions or just some comments, feel free to email me at jason@overthecap.com. You can find me on Twitter and, just send me a message, JasonOTC. We have a Facebook page. I don't update the Facebook page nearly as much as I update the Twitter feed. I should just do it automatically, and I just haven't done that yet. So really I end up updating once a week or 2 times a week for all the things we did. And, of course, the website is www.overthecap.com. overthecap.com. And, you can also post comments at OTC in the About section or on any articles that are there. Or right on this, I should be able to stick this in a post, and you can put some comments there if you would like. So anyway, we'll see if we do another one of these in the future. But I hope you enjoyed this, and if you made it all the way through to the end, hopefully this was informative, at least a little bit, in answering a lot of the more common questions that you might have and that I seem to get. So have a good night, and I'll see everyone else again soon.